She moves into it, and there it goes. It's high enough, it's long enough, it's a beauty. It's straight between the posts. The score here now.
Hello and welcome to That's the Way It Was, a program that looks back at the history of rugby league. In episode 24, journalist Ian Head has described it as, quote, like Iceland winning the Olympic Games medal count. But in 1973, that's exactly what happened in the game of rugby league when Newtown won the Flowers Memorial Pennant. To discuss the events that took place that year, we're going to speak to historian and author Terry Williams, who's written a number of books, including Out of the Blue and Through Blue Eyes. So, Terry, welcome to That's the Way It Was.
G'day, Rob.
Okay. Now, Terry, the Flowers Memorial Pennant is named after a fellow called Fred Flowers. So who was Fred Flowers?
Yeah, well, Fred Flowers was a Labor politician who was involved pretty much soon after the game started in 1908 and became patron of the New South Wales Rugby League until his death in 1928. He was also the patron of the South Sydney Club as well. I think he was tied up with Sir James Joyton Smith. So after he died, the league decided that they would honour his memory and his contribution to the game, and hence the Flowers Memorial Pennant was born.
Okay, so just explain this competition. What is the Flowers Memorial? Why was it started? How is it structured?
Yeah, well, it was a club championship. So basically, first grade premiership points were multiplied by 4, reserve grade by 3, and third grade by 2. And that structure was pretty much maintained for the duration of its life until the ARL took over the premiership in the 90s. But it certainly produced some interesting winners over the years, none more so than 1973.
Yeah, well, I remember growing up, when I was growing up, you always checked out the club championship table because I suppose it was it gave you an idea of sort of the strength or the health of your club, checking out the club championship table. Okay, so the competition starts in 1930 and Eastern Suburbs win the first Flowers Memorial Pennant. In fact, East, they win 6 of the first 8 titles. And this is generally what happens through the course of this competition's history. You find that certain clubs will dominate periods or stages of the competition history. Obviously, in the 1950s and 60s, St George is very dominant. In fact, St George has won the most club championships with 18 titles to their name. And from a Newtown point of view, they are runners-up in 1943 and 1944. Balmain won both of those years, but basically Newtown, they're never really in the running to win the club championship. In the lead-up to the 1973 season, Newtown finished 6th in 1972 in the club championship 1972. Remember, there's only 12 teams in the competition at this stage. They finished 11th in 1971, 11th in 1969. So they're not really in the running to win the Flowers Memorial Pennant. In fact, this period, the late 60s, early 70s, it's a pretty barren period for the Newtown Club. Well, they did win the reserve grade title in 1970. They won the reserve grade grand final. They beat Eastern Suburbs that year. But in 1972, for instance, none of the 3 teams at Newtown make the semi-finals. And in 1972, Manly win the club championship. They not only won their first premiership that year, Manly, of course, defeated Eastern Suburbs in the first grade grand final, but Manly also win their first Flowers Memorial Pennant. Sorry, in fact, they won it by just 1 point. Okay, Manly 286 points to St George 285 points, which is obviously the closest ever winning margin. Although there was one drawn club championship. In 1992, Newcastle and the Brisbane Broncos shared the club championship. Now, Terry, in 1973, Harry Barth, who's been coaching Newtown, he retires and Jack Gibson and Terry Fernley become coaches, along with Clary Jeffries and Paul Cuneo, who were coaching in the lower grades. So, Terry, at this stage of their careers, what could you tell us about Jack Gibson and Terry Fernley?
Yeah, well, Fernley hadn't coached, been a non-playing coach before. I think he'd been captain coach of the Roosters at one stage. But Gibson had certainly built a great reputation by 1973, firstly at the Roosters in 1967 and 68.
Mm-hmm.
The team that hadn't won a game in 66, he took them to the semi-finals in 67 and again in 68. And then when he went to St George, he took them to the grand final in 1971 and went within a whisker of toppling the mighty South Sydney team of that era. So, he was available, and Newtown were fortunate enough to get him. So,
okay, so the first thing that Gibson and Fernley do, along with Frank Farrington, who's the club secretary, is they take a trip to the United States. Why did they make this trip, Terry?
Well, Gibson and Fernley had a bit of a fascination with the professionalism and the coaching techniques that were being employed in American football. And it went back before 73 when it was Fernley who actually introduced Jack Gibson to the famous Vince Lombardi film, Second Effort. And Gibson had screened that when he was at St George, and it had such a profound effect on the teams he was coaching there. They didn't lose a game in any grade for about 6 weeks. So he obviously realised the impact that the ideas from America could have on rugby league. So he was a big student of it, and he built some relationships with people like Dick Nolan and some of the other coaches in the NFL.
And was this the first time that an Australian coach had gone over to America to study the coaching and training methods?
Yeah, pretty much, I think so. Some of the other ideas, such as weight training and diet and that sort of stuff, had infiltrated from other sports because, obviously Australia had a golden period in the 1950s with our swimmers and people like coaches like Forbes, Carlisle, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, but this was the first time that that sort of the rugby league and the weight training and all that sort of stuff, really dates back to Gibson and the influence that he was able to bring into the game from America.
All right. Okay, so Terry, Jack Gibson and Terry Fernley joined the coaching staff. From a player's point of view, well, Newtown, they only signed 3 players in that off-season leading up to 1973. They get Steve Hansard and Mick Suter from Cronulla, and Barry Cox joins from St George. So, can you give us some background on some of the main players at Newtown in 1973?
Yeah, we were fortunate enough to have 3 guys who were internationals in the squad, and they were probably the standout players. Firstly, the captain, Lionel Williamson, the great winger, who made the Newtown team of the century and was just an all-round legend as a player and as a person. And he was a big powerhouse, Lionel, and it was good enough to make the 73 Kangaroo Tour at the end of this season, even though he was getting a bit long in the tooth at that stage. But then we had the great Chicka Moore was in the centres, and Chicka could still run hot and cold at times, and certainly in the 73 World Cup final, he ran hot and was the reason that Newtown won that. So he bobbed up a bit between grades at times during the season, but on his day, again, just an absolute match winner. And the third guy was Gary Sullivan, who'd been in the World Cup squad the year before, and again was a mighty player, a dynamic back rower that came down from the coalfields, and was a great player for Newtown for about 5 seasons, and still represented Australia when he was here. But unfortunately, he was injured for the finals. Apart from that, there was a lot of good young players. I mean, and some quality first graders around. Guys like some of the seasoned first graders, like you had Tommy Melville. Then you had young kids from local products like Kenny Wilson and Cole Casey and the great Neil Pringle. It was again, they were outstanding players and had long, successful careers. So it's not like they were a team of nobodies. And there was a bit of pace out wide certainly with the Bradstocks, and Brucey Pickett emerged during that season and scored 4 tries and won on the game. So he was an absolute speed machine. And then at the back you had the great Johnny Floyd, and in an era of great fullbacks, I don't think Newtown would have swapped any of them, Johnny Floyd, for any of them. He was a superstar for us.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so, well, the 1973 season starts. And as I was saying earlier, there Newtown hadn't had much success in the years leading up to 1973, but they start the 1973 season by winning the pre-season Wills Cup.
Yeah, and in the final against St George, they were down 15-2 at halftime, and it was a stinking hot summer's night. And Gibson made the inspired decision to keep the team on the field and not go in the hot Sydney Sports Ground dressing sheds. He reasoned that they'd cool down more, and he just went quietly around. And he actually, at that stage, he introduced Chicker more into the game off the bench. And as I said before, Chicker transformed the game because he just bustled all the St George guys. And then when he got the ball, he was absolutely dynamic in attack. So Newtown came from behind, won 17-15, and everyone went back to the Leaf Club to get their skin full. And there was a bomb scare, and hardly anyone moved. I think they just went out on the footpath and with their schooners in their hand and went back in as soon as they could.
All right. Okay. All right. So in the club championship in 1973, basically Manly are on top of the club championship table for most of the season. Balmain were in front in the early rounds, but by round 4, right through to round 21, Manly are on top of the club championship. There was one slight interruption, and that occurs in round 14 when Newtown are playing Manly at Henson Park, and on that day, Newtown win the under-23s match. I should point out that the Newtown had a very good under-23s team in 1973. They only lost one game during the premiership season, and in round 14 they defeat Manly 21-7. Newtown also win the reserves. Now, whilst Newtown had a very good under-23s team, the Manly reserve grade team was, dominated the reserve grade competition. They only lost 3 games during the season, and one of those matches that they lost was this round 14 clash against Newtown. They are beaten by 22 points to 8. In the first grade, well, Newtown were leading virtually for the entire match up until 5 minutes to go. Manly lock forward there. Malcolm really puts in a little chip kick. He regathers and scores. And Manly win the first grade by 13 points to 11. But Newtown have picked up 10 club championship points, as you pointed out earlier. The third grade, or it's now third grade, if it's now the under-23 competitions, multiplied by 2, and the reserves by 3. So they pick up 10 club championship points. So they actually took a 1-point lead at the end of round 14, 182 to Manly's 181. But unfortunately, that lead only lasts for 1 week, because the following week, round 15, Newtown are beaten by Eastern Suburbs in the first grade, and Manly, they win all 3 grades against North Sydney, and they retake the lead in the club championship until round 21. Now, round 21 becomes a critical round in the 1973 club premiership. Newtown wins all 3 grades against Parramatta. However, Manly are beaten by Cronulla in the first grade and the under-23. So at the end of round 21, Newtown now have a 5-point lead in the club championship. Now, going into the final round of the club championship, Newtown could mathematically still lose the under-23s match and still possibly win the club championship, of course, depending on Manly's results against Balmain. Even if Manly defeated Balmain in all 3 grades, Newtown could mathematically still win the club championship if they win the first and the reserves. But Manly do win all 3 grades against Balmain. In round 22, Newtown defeats Penrith in the under-23s by 13-4. They win the reserves by 20-3. And in first grade, Newtown defeats Penrith by 20-10. Newtown win the 1973 Flowers Memorial Pennant by 290 points to Manly's 285. Now, Alan Clarkson, writing in the Sun Herald, he says, and I quote here, "It was an incredible effort to overcome the disadvantages of a tiny junior league an ever-encroaching industrial era, and a population made up basically of European immigrants. I won't quote the whole article, but he goes on there to speak about the fact that, Newtown only had 26 junior sides in the Newtown district there. As I said, they only had 3 new players at the club. He speaks about the new training methods, how all 3 grades apparently would train together, how there was more unity in playing styles between the 3 grades, he pointed out. I mean, a player could go up a grade from reserves to first, and there wasn't any change in playing styles. I mean, this is probably standard procedure these days, but back then it sounds like a rarity. So, Terry, do you agree with Alan Clarkson? Is his assessment of the win in the 1973 club championship? And also, why do you think that Newtown had limited success in the club championship?
Well, Alan Clarkson hits the nail on the head, as per usual. And the reasons he articulates is exactly why that the club had enjoyed no great success in the club championship over the years, because in terms of the area of the junior league and the club's district boundaries, it was probably the smallest catchment area in Sydney. It's surrounded by, it's landlocked, so it's surrounded by clubs on every other side.
Mm-hmm.
And so had no real potential for growth. And then because of the industrialisation, the nature of the suburb with the demographics, a lot of the white Anglo people had moved out when the housing boom had taken place in the West after World War II. My parents amongst them, who went from Marrickville out to beautiful Ashcroft, and then the ones who came in, a lot of those were migrant families, and a lot of them weren't rugby league supporters at the start, and even though a lot of their children now are, and the city has gone through a regentrification process and a regeneration process, and so that the real estate down there, as Kenny Wilson used to say, he said we couldn't wait to get out of Marrickville and Newtown. We thought they were slums, and he said we couldn't afford to buy back there these days. You know, like it's certainly a different demographic these days, but you know, like, and that was the time in the 1970s. And the sad thing was that a lot of the journalists and the authorities, the people running the game, they couldn't see that it would change, that it was only a moment in time that they were stuck in.
And that sort of, so that was sort of like, well, what Alan Clarkson was saying was virtually Newtown's history right from the very beginning, I suppose. It was a small landlocked area and underwent a lot of industrialisation and so forth. So, okay. All right, so Terry, in 1973, there was another sort of rare event. It was one of those years where the club that wins the club championship did not win any of the 3 grade grand finals. So just quickly, can you give us a rundown of what happened in those 3 grades? I mean, starting with the under-23s, I pointed out earlier, this team only lost 1 game during the whole season, but what happened in the under-23 competition?
Yeah, well, they made the grand final against Balmain, and Balmain were the team who'd beat them earlier in the year, so they were a fair side, the Tigers. They had the likes of Mark Levy in there, Noel Maybury, who went on to play for New South Wales, Jeff Bryan, who later coached Newtown in the Metro Cup reserve grade, and Des Bonner, I think, and who I think was the father of Dale Bonner that played for Newtown in the Metro Cup years as well. So the Tigers, Lloyd Martin was actually the 5'8", and he went on to have a very good career with Balmain and Canberra and in country rugby league as well. So, you know, they were a good side, and they only narrowly won. They scored a late try, Balmain, to win 10-7 in the under-23 grand final. So, you know, they were very unlucky, the Newtown 23s. The reserve grade a bit unlucky too, because they only got pipped by a point in the final, so a week before the grand final, 12-11 against the Dragons. And the first grade, well, they had a run of glory. They beat Canterbury in the elimination semi, and then they played a 12-all draw against St George at the cricket ground the next week. And because it was a draw after extra time, they had to have a replay on the Tuesday at the sports ground. And again, they packed packed him in. They said that, I think the official crowd was about 20,000, but they said that people were sitting on top of the grandstands, and
Yes.
it was an unbelievable scene apparently. And Newtown won that 8-5, but that meant they had to back up in 4 days' time again for their third game within a week to face Cronulla, who were fresh. And they just ran out of petrol too much. And with Gary Sullivan being out injured, I think some of the guys running on tired legs, it was probably a bridge too far for them. They certainly fought gamely. Cronulla got away to an early lead. I think it was 18-4 at half time. But the mighty Bluebags Jets couldn't peg them back in the second half, and it finished 20-11.
Yes, 20-11. I mean, that draw, well, I mean, the first drawn minor semi-final, as you said, it went to extra time. There was 10-all at full time. Well, John Bonham actually, the penalty goal that made it 12-all, John Bonham actually kicked that after the final siren.
Yeah.
So, yes. So, and as you said, the replay, 8-5. And of course, Manly would go on to win that 1973 premiership by 10 points to 7. And finally, Terry, the Flowers Memorial Pennant, is it still running? Is it still an active competition?
Yeah, it's still awarded to just in the New South Wales Rugby League now. So obviously the NRL results have no bearing on it. It's only for New South Wales Cup, or the knock-on effect cup, I think it's called these days, from there down through their grade. So it is still awarded, and I understand Penrith won it last year. So
yes, okay, all right. That's the way it was. We are the champions, Newtown, 1973. My name's Rob Cora. On behalf of Terry Williams, this program was recorded in the studios of Undercover Music. Your producer is Lachlan McLean. Until next time, may the force be with you.
Newtown is coming.